Hey, good, very good. Baruch Hashem. Okay, so we are holding on Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph 33a, and one of the things that we talked about yesterday was that the term for hadas is a anaf eitz avos. The term that the Torah uses is not the word hadas; it uses another term. It's called anaf eitz avos. And this, oh, 1 second, what's going on here? And so the anaf eitz avos that the Torah uses, the Gemara understands to mean, number one, that the branch has to be covered with leaves, enough of chayfen es eitzai. The leaves are the leaves are um, are covered. The leaves are covering the stem. And another point that we saw was that it has to be avos. Now, what is avos? Avos, I mean, ava could mean thick, but it means braided. Now, what does it mean that it's braided? And we sort of struggled a little. One of the points we said yesterday was it definitely seems to be that it's overlapping. There seems to be sheyehu merkavin ze al ze. So the Gemara itself really asked, "What is avos?" And the Gemara said, "Heichi dami avos." This is a brisa, and the Gemara said that avos means that there are three in one from one bud, from one juncture. The hadas has a number of junctures throughout the length of the hadas. So there's three in one. That's called avos. So we have this concept that avos means overlapping. We see here that it means three in one. And yesterday, well, what we were trying to figure out, and I don't know if everyone followed exactly what the struggle was, but the struggle was that when the Gemara says, maybe this is a hadas, and the Gemara answers that, and then the Gemara says,
okay, good.
If the Gemara says, maybe this is a hadas, and the Gemara says, no, it can't be that because of this problem, and then the Gemara jumps to another option, maybe that's a hadas, and the Gemara says, no, it can't be that because of a different problem. So we have to assume that the second option that the Gemara offers has to answer the first option, but it has a different problem. And so again, let's think of what the Gemara said. The Gemara had said, Anaf eitz avos means this tree that the branches cover the stem, and we're translating it to mean the leaves cover the stem. So that's the first hint, and that's a hadas. The Gemara's first argument is, or question is, how about the zayas, ema zesa? So what it sounds like is, if a hadas is a branch that has leaves that cover the stem, the Gemara says, well, what about a zayas? It must mean that the zayas doesn't have is not missing that characteristic. The zayas must have that characteristic as well, and that's why the Gemara is offering. So let's try the zayas, the olive tree. So the olive tree must have enough of chayfen es eitzai. It must have that characteristic. That the leaves must be that it covers the stem. So the Gemara says, but why can't it be a zesa, an olive? The Gemara says, because of avos. Now, so what does avos mean? And here again, it's a little vague. Rashi uses the word sharsheres, which means a chain, in that they should be lying one on the other. So what we were trying to figure out is, so does that mean lying horizontally or vertically? Vertically, the bottom one is lying on the top one, and that one is lying on the top one. Is that like a chain? To me, that would sound more like a chain. On the other hand, um, I have a problem learning that way. If we learn that way, and this is the way, learning Gemara is really a lot of process of elimination. You try learning one way, it doesn't work. So then you got to try learning another way. So let's say that, the problem with the Zayas tree is that they don't overlap the bottom one to the top one. Let's say that's what the meaning of the Gemara is. It has to be a chain. The way Rashi seems to translate, it has to be a chain that one is riding on top of the next one on top of it. So the problem with the Zayas is it doesn't have that, but they might be covering the stem, but they're not overlapping the one on top of it. Now, then what does the Gemara offer? The Gemara says, okay, so it can't be the Zayas, no problem. How about the Dulva? The Dulva, which we translate as a chestnut. Rashi, Taisus argues, says it doesn't think it's a chestnut, but anyway, Taisus says the leaves don't seem to. He says, "Einza kostina, eino kalu." It's not. It doesn't have this braid effect. But the Gemara is asking that it should be a chestnut branch or dulva. Well, we'll just say dulva because Taisus doesn't seem to think that that's the characteristic of a chestnut tree. So let's just say a dulva instead of chestnut. So the Gemara says, let's try a dulva. Now, if the Gemara is offering a dulva, it must mean that it doesn't have the previous that, in other words, it has the characteristic that we need that we just mentioned. What's the characteristic that we just mentioned that that is bad that the Zayas doesn't have, and this is not going to have that problem. It'll have that characteristic. Avos. So a dulva must have avos. It must be that it's overlapped. Now, what do we translate avos? So the way we just translated avos meant that it's overlapping. The one on the bottom overlaps the one on top of it, and that one overlaps the one on top of that. So probably dulva doesn't have that problem. Right? It's overlapping. So the Gemara says, no, it can't be dulva because we need that the branches, the leaves, going to cover the stem. And what does Rashi say? Aval ein olav retzufin l'chasis kol eitzoy. They aren't rotzuf. Rotzuf means one after the other. Continuous. They aren't. I don't know how would you say it? Like one next to the other enough that they're to cover the entire branch. So it's not kolua. It's not braided. Ein olav tzufin l'chasis kol eitzah. They aren't braided. Kaluahu, but I'm sorry, it is braided, but it's not ritzufin. It's not often enough. Rotzuf means right away. It's not. So it's not. They're not exactly next to each other to cover the entire tree. Now, what does that mean? Seemingly, what it means is that the dulva tree might have overlapping, but it doesn't have. It has overlapping along the horizontal way overlapping, but not vertically. Meaning, you might have a branch on the bottom, you might have a branch above it, but there's leaves above it, but there is space in between these two junctures by the dulva tree. Seemingly, that's what it means. Unless you want to say it
braided. It may be braided, but it's not overlapping.
So what does that mean? That it's braided? What does braided mean? In a leaves, when you talk about leaves, what does it mean physically braided? What would that mean? That it overlaps in what way?
No, just the shape even, that it looks, I don't know.
So my thought is that braided means one on top of the other in the horizontal.
What is overlapping?
It's overlapping. One is overlapping the other, the ones next to it, but it's not. But it's not.
But there aren't next to it because there's only a few. There's only a few that come out at each juncture. You can't have next to it. Don't you have 3 flowers coming out from each little branch?
By a hadas. Now we're talking about a dulva. And we're saying that there is a problem with dulva. You can't use a dulva for hadas. And the problem with dulva is not avos. The problem with dulva is that the leaves don't cover the stem. So there is a problem with dulva. And the problem is not avos. The problem is that it's not the avos problem, the braided problem. Braided it is. It is braided, but the problem is that it doesn't have leaves that cover its stem. So in the way Rashi learns that they're not ritzufim. And ritzufim means they're not immediate. They're not covering every spot. They're not one after the other. So there's space. So it's braided, but there's space. It's not covering the entire stem. So if you want to learn this way, that avos means they're overlapping one on top of the other, then you'll have to say what Rashi means, I guess, is that you don't have three in one spot in one area, so they're not covering the entire stem, but they are kolua. They're braided one on top of the other, but they're not ritzufim l'chasis kol eitzai. They're not one after the other, at least around it in the horizontal way. Maybe you'll learn that way. Okay, possibly. Although it is interesting that later when the Gemara says, what is avos? Avos means that they are three in one. That's what avos really means. So the other option to learn is maybe the opposite way, that we're not really saying here. In other words, what I'm telling you is it becomes a little problematic, complicated, how you're translating the avos here, and then the Gemara translates avos a little later. So how about if you learn avos always means the same thing? And maybe avos always means just horizontally that it overlaps, not vertically. Maybe you're going to learn that way. And if you learn that way, so the only problem you'll have is when the Gemara says kolua kamin kliya v'daima l'shalshelas. It's similar to a chain. So how are you going to understand that if it's similar to a chain? The chain seemingly means one on top of the other, right? That's what it would seem like, that it's overlapping one on top. The ones on bottom are overlapping the ones on top of it. So, I mean, unless you want to learn that a chain means that it's just means overlapping. And if you say it just means overlapping, you could say it means the horizontal way overlapping. Again, I'm trying to figure out how to reconcile. The Gemara seems to be translating avos to mean that it's braided, avos to mean that it's three in one. Avos means like a chain. There seems to be a few concepts here that we're connecting to avos, but it's a little vague what it actually means. And I must say it becomes a question as to what exactly, or maybe it's both. In other words, is the Gemara translating avos to mean both? Now, the reason I mentioned this. Okay, yeah, yes, Jeffrey, you want to say something?
There's a kind of circumstance with plants where the leaves or the fruits don't grow in a straight line. They grow so that they can catch the most sun. So at one nodule, you have some leaves or fruit or something, and then the next one is going to be slightly higher and more, let's say, to one left or to the right. Then the next one, if you turn around the stem, it's going to go around. Then they're going to go around the stem. As you go up the stem, you look it up, but they're not necessarily covering all of the stem. So I thought that that's also a possibility. So if you look at, for example, like a bunch of celery, they're not all coming out of the same place. Half of it is covering the next one as you go around. Same thing with corn, and it grows. The corn is growing over here, then the next one's going to go further around. So that it still could look like braiding.
Mm-hmm.
if that's the case. But I don't know what all these, we really need examples, pictures of all these plants to know if that's
Right.
what it is. But that's one of the efficiencies of certain kinds of branches.
Uh-huh.
And that would look like a braid to me.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Interesting. You bring up some interesting point with like corn. If you think about the leaves coming out of the corn, it does seem to be
They
very
alternate
do cover,
as they go up.
they cover over the entire thing. So maybe corn should be used for for hadas. The only problem with corn is that it is a fruit. It's a
Right.
edible fruit.
But hadas also grows a fruit.
Well, the thing is, it doesn't seem to be an edible fruit.
No, correct. But
In other words, it would be
that's
called
what made me
braid.
think of this. But
Uh-huh.
because stems that grow something on the besides the leaves
Uh-huh.
would tend to maybe move as you go up the stem. They would tend to move around the stem so that they all get light better.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Right. Right. Interesting. Uh-huh. So in other words, it's
Conceivable
specifically the
that one
ones
of
that
these trees is like that, and that word is saying is what's translated like a sharceres or like a braid.
right. Right. Okay. Anyway, the thing that it seems to me that the Gemara is basically saying both, that you need to have these both of these. In other words, the hadas is something that seems to have both, and the Gemara seems to switch back and forth between what avos means if it is overlapping, and overlapping seemingly applies to both of these ideas, that below and above and the side to side, that it overlaps. Because when it says that it's what is avos, it seems to say clearly it's just three in coming out of one juncture, which definitely makes it. It seems to be just the only important thing is the horizontal. It has to be overlapping to the ones next to it. And then when it says that it's similar to a shalsheles, kolua like a shalsheles, that's what a hadas is, at least according to that opinion. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa that it's kaluas kamin kliya doimel shalsheles. Now, and that's what a hadas is. That it's braided, and the word ava means braided. So it seems like it's translating the word ava to mean that it's similar to a chain. Shalsheles is a chain, and the chain seemingly is that it interlocks the bottom one interlocks into the top. In a certain sense, it's like overlapping. The bottom one overlaps by a chain. The bottom overlaps the top chain. So it seems that the Gemara is. I am a little surprised that the commentaries don't seem to discuss this. From what I looked, they maybe it's obvious. Maybe that's why they're learning that way. But it did come up. The Gemara that we learned yesterday talked about a case that the Gemara thought was a contradiction. It said, with all of the leaves, if the majority of the leaves fell off, this was a case the Gemara brought in a brisa. It said the majority of the leaves fell off, but you still have a little left. It's kosher as long as it is called avos, as long as it's considered avos, braided, as long as it's braided. So you have majority fell off, but it's still called braided. It's kosher. The Gemara says, how could you have such a thing? Because if the majority fell off, that means like 2 leaves fell off of every juncture. How could you call it braided? How is it possible to call it braided? You only have 1 leaf on every juncture. So the question I have is, so really you can't have braided? Maybe it could be considered braided because one is overlapping the one on top of the one, that one, and that one is overlapping the one on top of that. So maybe that could be called braided. And if it's overlapping, maybe that should be good. The Gemara doesn't seem to have that option. So obviously the Gemara is understanding braided to mean side by side. Now, even if it also means one on top of the other, but the Gemara says it also has to mean side by side. And therefore, you can't answer that. In other words, my question on the bottom line of the Gemara is, why can't the Gemara answer that you have braided? Because one on top of the other and one on top of that one could be called braided because it looks like it's like a braid. Seemingly that could be considered a braid when you have one on top of the other. Unless you want to say you need 2 to make a braid. I don't know. Mordechai, yes.
Yeah, if they if that in that definition the top of one leaf is reaching the bottom of the next, it's like the Kohen Gadol's haircut.
Right, right. But here it's overlapping. In other words, in this case, we're talking about that it overlaps. Here by the Kohen Gadol, it had to be exact, not overlapping. Like the goal was that it shouldn't overlap, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, or or it touches it but it doesn't overlap it, something like that? But here it seems that the idea is that it has to overlap. Um, um, so yeah, so it seems like on the bottom the Gemara is clearly saying that it has to be side by side, because otherwise the Gemara could have answered you have one on top of the other. Unless you want to say maybe a braid needs two. So you need two on top and two on the bottom to be called a braid. And if majority fell off, you only have one. So majority of the leaves fell off, you only have one, then you can't call it a braid. I don't know. I don't know if that would be so. Maybe if we're calling it a braid because it looks like it is coming down from the one on top, and it's like a continuation, like a braid. I don't know. Yes, Jeffrey, you want to show us something? So Jeffrey created some type of a hadas over there, braided. That would be like a braid when it's round, when it's maybe on the yeah. Oh, now we can hear you, but we don't see you.
Hear you. Yeah. Okay. So,
but we don't see you. Now we got to get your video also. Okay. Yeah. Now, for a second we saw you. Okay. Now we see your hand. Yeah. What is that, by the way?
It's something that I found in my aunt's apartment.
Okay.
Okay. And it really has here's real braiding. This with where this it's like a chain and braided. Okay. How clearly you can see it. Okay. But you see there are spaces in between, but it's like a chain and braided. That's one kind of thing that looks like a chain and braided. Okay. It's not metal, it's leather.
Right. Right.
But where is that growing
the way plants
from?
grow. The way the
where
white
would that be growing from?
Now he's giving us examples of a braid.
I know, but I'm saying braided and whatever, but you have to have always a starting point for a plant. Right? If it's a leaf, then I just want to know where on that belt you're making, where's it growing from?
Okay, but I don't have leaves to show you. I just have, this is made out of leather. Right. It looks like a chain. It looks like it's in between. You don't have that on a stem. Right. But it does look like a chain because there's more than one piece, I believe, that's being crossed over on this. But if you have just a plain stem and you have the white, something like the white,
right,
it's also alternating and going around.
Okay? So my question to you
is
more
than one thing that we have to figure out about kalua and of, not these words.
Right.
What it can mean. And we have to find the diagrams. But there's a lot of different ways in which it could be a chain.
I see.
Then I could understand this also is like side to side. So if two leaves are here, and then the next one has a leaf here, and the next one has two there, as you go around, it does cover the stem, and but it doesn't have all the leaves.
It doesn't cover on all sides, but it covers at one point.
And it doesn't overlap. Everything doesn't overlap.
And what happens if you would have one on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, but there's only one leaf on each? Would you think that looks like a braid to some extent?
If it's going around, if that's what they mean by if it's going around, so there's one leaf here, and then one leaf here, and one leaf here as it goes around the stem. So
that's how you see a braid. That
might be acceptable.
So you see the braid that it goes around it.
Maybe.
Not just that it goes from one to the one on top.
Like corn. But on the other hand, this happens to be here. I don't know what it was.
Right. Interesting.
Okay. All right. It's a chain also with leather but with spaces in between.
Right. Gotcha.
Okay.
Anyway,
there's a lot of possibilities that we have to figure out.
So in any event, so my thought was, and I'm just sharing with you why I learned the Gemara this way. There is a sefer that I need to get a hold of. It's called the Shilos Teshuvas Divrei Nehemiah. seems like they keep quoting it, even though they're not spelling out exactly what he says. They keep just mentioning, look there. So I'm gonna have to get a hold of that book and just that safer and see. It sounds to me like he might discuss this issue, but otherwise, I didn't really see the commentaries talking about it. So I'm gonna Mitzvah Hashem take a look how he learned. But my thought is that it's both. There's overlapping on the sides and overlapping one on top of the other. Clearly, it's overlapping to the sides because it says what is avos. It means that there's three going in one, and it doesn't mention that it's right next to the one on top of it. So it's definitely horizontal that it's overlapping. To say that it's vertical also, it seems that from the kalua, from the fact that it's called braided and shalshelis, a chain, to me that sounds like it's overlapping the one on top of it. That's what it sounds like to me. Now, and that would be the Gemara's question: is that on the bottom that if you're missing the question on the Gemara at the bottom of the Gemara is if you're missing the ones on the side, how do you have one and it's called avos? It doesn't have the overlapping of the ones next to it. And on that, the Gemara answered that we're dealing with an interesting type of a hadas, that it's called a hadas mitzra'ah, hadas of Egypt, or a hadas on the wall. They use these as a wall of a fence, and they would grow these type of hadassim there, and they would have 7 leaves growing out of every juncture. Now, I do want to mention one thing, and that is that Teves over here and Rashi argue. Rashi says that it very, very specific. A hadas has to be that all the 3 leaves or more, as we see, it could even be 7. They all have to come out of one juncture itself. There's one bud and it has 3 leaves or more. Teves says that's impossible. To get hadassim, that they come exactly out of the same bud. This is the bottom Teves over here. He says it's a chumra gedola that's einoi matzui. It's not found. You're not going to find hadassim like that. It's impossible. He says maybe it means that they're next to each other. There's 3 buds. They're right next to each other, but not that they're one bud that they're all coming. All the leaves are coming out of, and he brings a source. He brings a proof that sometimes it uses such a term, but it doesn't mean it so literally. Chad kina, with one from one bud. They can't mean it so literally because he's saying it's impossible. You're not going to find hadassim like that.
It depends what kina means also. Right?
Okay, true.
Because
but the way Teves is understanding it,
it sounds like the word for a nest.
Okay, but
right.
it's the base of where the leaf is coming out of. But
I wouldn't call it a juncture. I would call it a nodule.
Nodule.
And so that's why if it's a swelling around, it's a swelling around the branch.
Okay, good.
Okay. And then the leaves come out of the same swelling.
Okay. Sounds good. So the Teves wants to be more of Teves says you can't follow the way Rashi is saying it is impossible. So Teves says you can be a little more lenient. And of course the later Poskim they say that as long as you would wrap a string around the hadas and it would touch all the nodules that the 3 leaves are coming out of, that would be considered kosher. So in other words, it doesn't have to be exact. If it's exact enough for a string that they'll all be touching that string, that would be good enough. So some might be touching a little more on the bottom, a little higher up, but it's touching. They're all touching the same. You're wrapping a string around it. The whole circumference is all it's on one wraparound. It's they can all be touched. That would be considered a hadas, a proper hadas. Okay, and then of course we did see about the leniency of Rav Kahana. We spoke about that since it came out of Rav Kahana's mouth that you could have 2 on one from one nodule or for at one place in the hadas, and one like below it, but it goes up and and overlaps the others. So that would be also kosher according to Rav Kahana, and we said that Rav Acha Berei Rava, he would specifically get that, and the vart was he was being machmir, not necessarily on hadas, because it's not a chumrah, it's not an extra stringency to have such a hadas, it's more of a leniency maybe, but he was careful to the kavod of his Rebbe, he wanted to specifically get that type of hadas because his Rebbe said it's kosher. So he said, he was mahader, he was beautifying the mitzvah of honoring one's teacher, honoring a Torah scholar, and he specifically wanted to use that. Okay, and then we spoke about this asa mitzrah, the hadas that's from Egypt, and we said that even a hadas that has another name added to it, that's still okay. So what we see really is two things from this. We see, number one, if you have a hadas that has 4 leaves or 5 leaves coming out or 7 leaves coming out, that's kosher. And number 2, even if a hadas has an additional name to it, it's also kosher. That's really what we see. Because it tells us here, the Gemara clearly says asa mitzrah is going to be kosher. So this is a and even if the majority of the leaves fall off, as long as there's 3 left, that would be kosher, and it would be considered a proper hadas. And what's interesting is, and what I did mention it yesterday, I'll just mention it again, that what ends up happening with this law of the hadas that has 7 leaves, it ends up being a difference in halacha from a regular hadas that has 3 leaves. In what sense? That the hadas that has 3 leaves, if you have 2 left, it's for sure kosher. Or at least there's opinions that it's kosher. If you have 2, the majority are still there. We could follow majority. There is such a accepted. We will soon see Shulchan Aruch, but the hadas that has you could go by roiv, you go by majority, and 2 would be enough. But a hadas that starts with 7 and it loses 5, you no longer have majority there. And what you're going to have is a problem that it's not considered overlapping because you only have 2 leaves on each nodule, not 3. So it's not totally covering the whatchamacallit. It's not totally covering. It's not a problem of that. It's not overlapping. It is overlapping maybe because the 2 are
not
overlapping.
Covering the stalk.
It's not covering the stem, the stalk. That's it. Thank you, Isaac. It's not covering the stalk, and so that would be a problem with this hadas mitzrah. Okay, so that really covered the discussion of the hadas. What is a hadas? When is the hadas a problem? If they're not coming out of the same nodule or right near the same, they're near each other, right next to each other's nodule, and then if the leaves fall off. So the Brisa had said if majority leaves are still there, it's kosher, and that the Gemara understood as long as it's avos, still avos, that was a asa mitzrah. And then the Gemara talked about yavshu roiv olav. And yavshu is where they dry up. So the Gemara says, at least the wording that we have is yavshu roiv olav v'nisharu shloisha badei yolin, that the majority have dried up. And all you have is 3 on the 3 stems. Shloisha badei
3 leaves. 3 leaves.
Well, let's see. Rashi says Shloisha badei olin lachin, Shloisha badin, uv'chol bad Shloisha olin lachin.
Right.
If a batzir mishloisha alin leihavi avis. So Rashi learns that it means you have 3 leaves on each of these badim, like Isaac is saying, that there are three on from each of the stems. There's 3 leaves. Each bad has 3 leaves, and otherwise it wouldn't be considered avos. You need 3, and again, we're seeing that avos means that they have to be horizontally next to each other, and so yavshu raival v'nishru shleisha badei alin lachin, leaves that are fresh. Kosher, it is kosher. And Rav Chizda says, as long as they're at the top of Rosh Kol Echad, they have to be at the top. But if they're in the middle, it would not be a kosher hadas. It won't be hadar, and that would be a problem. Now, so what is bada? So how do you translate the words? So shloisha bade olin lachen means 3 branches of or 3 leaves, really. 3 badin olin lachen.
Are the
branches? Well, badim seem to be the branches, right?
Yes, I think so.
Of olin lachen, meaning, and it doesn't say 3, but we're translating it to be 3.
It's almost as if the branches supplement one another.
Each branch supplements the other branch?
It almost seems like that.
Uh-huh.
Not branch. Here you're talking about the leaves. Each leaf has a stem also growing out of the branch.
But
so
what
you
about
can't
the word
have
bad?
it with 2 leaves on one and then 1 leaf on the level under it. It has to be 3 leaves on the same level of the branch.
Right.
But the word bad is used here. We didn't have that before.
Well, the term badim is used where? It's used by the Mishkan, and it means handles.
A pole.
Poles like handles.
Right. So I think that it means the whole stem is a bad. So if you have 3 stems,
right.
bad they all.
But bad also means singular. 1 alone.
Right. But badei would be plural. Shleisha badei olin lachen. So shleisha badei, 3 of these stems with olin lachen, with fresh leaves, and Rashi's translating it to mean with 3 leaves in each. Or maybe he's translating 3 of 3 leaves on each bad. 3 leaves, shleisha badei, 3 per bad, olin lachen, of fresh leaves. It sounds a little surprising to translate it that way. It seems like he's translating 3 badin. In each bad, you have olin lachem, some fresh leaves. It's anyway. There is another opinion over here of how to learn it. And Shulchan Aruch brings another view that maybe we'll should we do the Shulchan Aruch? Let me pull out the Shulchan Aruch here. Shulchan Aruch has let's go over these the way Shulchan Aruch brings up these laws. There's a chapter in Shulchan Aruch about the Hadassim, Taf Reish Mem Vav 646. In 646, chapter 646, in the regular Shulchan Aruch, so it says that the hadas, that the top is cut off, is kosher. Nashru roiv alav, if the leaves, majority of them have fallen off, as long as there are 3 olin, 3 leaves, bekan echad, on one, from one kan, one which we're translating as like a nodule, or so it's kosher. Now, what does that mean? So we'll soon see that there's a discussion about this. This is the Rambam, and then soon we'll see the other views. So each leaf, each kan. Okay, let me read it inside. So if the paragraph 3, if the anaf eitz avos, that the branch that the Torah calls Anaf Eitz Avos, that it says in the Torah, is called a hadas, that the leaves have to cover the stem. And that means that there's 3 or more at each juncture, at each nodule. But if there's 2, if there were only 2 leaves and the third one is above them, that is not called avos. It's called a hadas shoita. Now, the Ramah says that it's pasul even b'shas hadchak. Even if you have nothing else, it's invalid. But there is an opinion in the Gemara that it's kosher, and therefore we are lenient in these countries to fulfill the mitzvah with these type of hadassim, and they don't have 3 in one nodule. So the Ramah says people seem to be lenient, and some write that the hadassim that we use are not called hadas shoita since there's 2 on top of 2. It's not the same as the hadas shoita that's mentioned in the Gemara. And therefore, people are lenient. They want to say that this case is not exactly the same case. The Gemara had talked about a case of a hadas shoita where it says trei v'chad. There's 2 and 1, and it doesn't say maybe that that they overlap on the next 2. And here it's overlapping on top of the next 2, and there's reason to say maybe that's different. So, so people are lenient. 2 on top of 2. Again, I'm not familiar with this minhag, but it's brought here and it's brought in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, that some say that is some write that the hadassim and not the hadas shoita because they're 2 on top of 2, and it's not like the hadas shoita that's mentioned in the Gemara, and therefore they're lenient, and maybe there isn't a third one. Maybe that's what it means, that there's no third one. It's a little vague because we're not familiar with this leniency, but anyway, that's what he brings, that the people seem to be lenient, even though the Shulchan Aruch says that it's called a hadas shoita, it's invalid, but the Ramah mentions people seem to be lenient. Now, paragraph 4 talks about the hadas mitzvah. Yatzu harbe b'kan echad. If many leaves come out of one nodule and they fell out, that there's only 3 left in from each of the nodules. There's 3 left. It's kosher. So even though majority fell out, it's kosher. Even though majority fell out, because it started with 7 and you lost 4, but you still have 3, that would be kosher. And of course, that implies that if it was 2 left, it wouldn't be kosher. If it's 3 left, you have avos. It could be called avos. But if it's only 2 left, it would be a puzzle. Even though a regular hadas that has 3 coming out, and if 1 falls out on each of the nodules, from each of the nodules, 1 leaf falls out, and you only have 2, many achronim say it's kosher. So many opinions say it's kosher there. This is different because the reason why that would be kosher is because that still has majority. But right here, the majority fell out, so you would need it to be called avos, and you wouldn't be able to call it avos because it's not avos. It sounds like from this Mishnah Brura that avos doesn't just mean it overlaps, but it's overlapping all around it. In other words, you could say maybe two is called overlapping. The Mishnah Brura seems to say no, that the problem is avos, that they're not all 3. All 3 have to be has to be overlapping completely around it. And if you only have 2 left, it's not completely avos. If you have a majority, so even though it's not avos called rubai kakulai, we consider it as if it's avos, if it's that it fulfills the concept of being this braid. But if it's not fully around it, you don't have 3, then it's
Rebbe,
yes.
When we're saying avos, they're wrapping around it. Yeah. So the leaf grows up from the stem, alongside the stem, and is curved around the stem itself, the whole stem.
Right. So if you have 2 and not 3,
you can't do that, right?
That's not called avos. Now,
Right.
many achronim will say, many opinions will say that it's kosher on our types of hadassim because it's called rubai kikula. You have majority, so it's going to be kosher. But if you started out with 7 and 5 fell off, then you don't no longer can say majority. I have majority because I have 2. You don't have majority because majority was 7. The whole thing was 7. You only have 2. So you have a minority, and it's not avos. It's not avos. So if you started off with 3,
the idea of overlapping that we were saying before is vertical. Is that the leaves are tall enough that they are touching the bottoms of the next level of leaves.
But it doesn't seem to be the avos that we're talking
about.
No,
not avos, but I'm saying, but the other thing that we were talking about
the concept of
now has to do with the vertical reach.
That's another issue. We're not dealing with that. All we're dealing now with is the
avos, horizontal.
Horizontal. Now,
Rabbi, question.
Yeah.
You translated shalshelet as
a chain.
I always thought that shalshelet with a resh, not a lamed.
It seems that both are called chains.
And shalshelet, by definition, is normally something flowing downward, vertically downward.
Right. And sharsheret?
Sharsheret is a chain.
The chain, which also is okay. Right.
No, the chain could be in either direction. It's not by definition. It's a bodily function. So that's the reason why in modern it's
right. Gotcha. But right, okay. Well, anyway, Rashi uses the word, it's interesting. Rashi uses the word sharsharais, and the Gemara used the word shalshelas. So now Rashi uses the word sharsharais there.
Okay.
Inon avais maisa sharsheras, and then the Gemara uses the word kalua kamin v'daima l'shalshelas. There's some object called the shalshelas. Daima l'shalshelas. Shalshelas. If you look in
under Vayibaed.
Isn't that also used in Masechet Shabbat?
I don't know the whole Shas. I don't know. I think I know what you're talking about an animal taking an animal out. So it uses the word.
Wasn't it something that the women?
No, Bashir? No, maybe. I'm sorry. Wear? What is that?
Women wear.
Yeah. Takshitin. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe a necklace. You're saying maybe that's what it's called. Here, but if you translate, well, I mean, translate Hebrew. Translate Hebrew to English, and you just write shalshelas. I believe it's also a chain. Let's see, shalshelas, chain. At least Google calls it a chain. So I mean, shilshul is a bodily function, but shalsheles is a chain, and let's see, sharsharais. 1 second. Sharsharais. Let's see. Google also calls a chain.
Sharsheret.
Or sharsheret, whatever. Sharsheret. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, whatever. It seems like I think Rashi and Chumash might use that when it says sharsharais gavlus masei avos.
Correct.
I think Rashi might use the word.
Isn't the resh and the lamed interchangeable? Because no, something to do with the way the sound is made.
Oh.
You can swap those two, I believe. I don't know. Those
in
two
some
letters
languages,
also.
In some languages, but not everywhere.
If I remember correctly, you discussed something in the Nevi'im that the word shibolet and was problematic for one of the tribes and caused great harm.
Yes, but that was the shin. They couldn't say the shin.
Yes, the shin and the sin, right. That's how they tested which tribe they're from. Right. Was that Pilegesh Begiva? Where was that? Was that Pilegesh? No, it was I have to look it up.
It was a different milchama.
Different war.
It was used as a security
Against the Yidden, against the Yidden? No. But there were other
one
wars?
tribe against the other.
security.
Yeah, but where was it?
Benjamin.
Oh, they were angry, right?
Anyway.
Yeah, I have to look it up. I don't remember. Yeah, but you're right. This Fibilas, right? It was in any event. Okay, so so the Mishnah Berurah over here tells us the Shulchan Aruch. Where are we up to here? The Shulchan Aruch says the mitzvah be'inan kol shirim echad.
The Book of Prophets is the story about interrogation on.
So in paragraph 5, the Mishnah Berurah says, the Shulchan Aruch says, for a mitzvah, you should really have the whole length of the hadas avos to be, surrounded with 3. Li'ikuva, at least you should have roiv. Li'ikuva berubai, even if they're not on the top. So the hadas should start off with they should all have 3, the 3 leaves coming out of the same place. Avos means they come out, the 3 leaves come out of the same place. That's the way it should be. Which basically means that the hadas, what happens is that the longer, normally on the top of the hadas, they are together. The further away they are from the top, they sometimes are. They're not on the same line. So as the hadas gets closer to the top, they start becoming on the same line. So that's where once it gets on the same line, they generally all the leaves are on the same line from there and above. That's just the practical side of it. But so really it would be ideal to have the entire measurement of the hadas should be this avos where they're all coming from they're all coming out of the same nodule. Now paragraph 6 says if the leaves dried out, they're puzzle. If they're just partially dried out, they're kosher. How dried out? So even if they're so the Shulchan Aruch says even if they're going to crumble with your fingernail, as long as they're still green, they're kosher, and they're not called dried out only when they become white. That's the Shulchan Aruch. And the Magen Avram says after they would crumble with your fingernail, then when they become white, that would be you sort of like need both. Magen Avram says, but the Mishnah Berurah says, how is it? You normally won't have it. That if it's white, that it's not going to be that you're not going to be able to crumble it with your fingernail. So once it's white, that's called dried, according to Mishnah Berurah. Magen Avram says you need both, but the Mishnah Berurah says, but that the practicality of that is that it's always going to be that way. So once it's white, that would be enough. And he gives a way to figure it out. If you soak it in water and it still won't go back to where it was, it's definitely dried out enough.
In one case, you can use it a lot longer than the second case.
What'd you say? In one,
if it's dried out but it doesn't crumble,
right?
Basically means you can use it more for a longer period of time before it crumbles.
Right.
According to Magen Avram, he says, you'd still be allowed to use it as long if it doesn't crumble yet. But Mishnah Berurah seems to think that that's highly impractical, that it's going to happen that way. In other words, it probably will crumble once it's white. But but what you're saying is correct. The Magen Avram does say that. There's a discussion. What about if the leaves might be fresh, but the actual stem is dried out? That would be again, I don't know how practical that is. Normally it's the leaves that get dried out. The stem, again, I don't know if that's so practical, but they do have a discussion about that here. Okay, then paragraph 8 is Yavshu Raiv Olav. So here you got the majority of the hadas is dried out, and you have on the top of each of the bad, from the 3 bads, meaning the 3 branches, the 3 stems, you have 3 stems of myrtle. So from each of them, if you have on the top kan echad, 1 nodule, and it has 3 fresh leaves, that's kosher. So that's one opinion. And v'yesh mefarshim, and some commentaries say, even if the 3 that are coming out of 1 nodule, if the 2 of them dried up and all you have is 1, that's also kosher. All you have is 1 leaf, that's kosher. And that is that there should be that leaf should be higher than the other 2. So if you have, the Mishnah Berurah adds that it's interesting that the Shulchan Aruch leaves this out. Mishnah Berurah says it's surprising why the Mishnah Berurah left this out, but this is the opinion of the Rosh, and what he says is you don't need it to be on the top of this stem. Rather, it's kosher. You need 3 nodules, and each nodule has 1 leaf that's fresh, and it's above the others. And he says the commentaries all ask why it was left out in the Shulchan Aruch. But when you have one that's resting on top of the 2, then it's visible that it's it's more visible. In other words, it's higher than the other 2.
They're all coming out from the same.
Right, so they overlap somewhat.
Yeah, it is, how exactly that works. So you have, so basically you have one of the leaves seems to be higher than the others. Then it'll be visible that it's a hiddur, and therefore it's going to be kosher. But if all 3 leaves are fresh, then it's fine. Of course, it's fine. In any event, what comes out is that there is another understanding over here, and this understanding seems to hold that when it says 3, it means that you have 3 on 1 branch, that 3 nodules that at least have 1 leaf that's kosher, that's fresh, that would be okay, and that leaf has to be above all the other leaves. So in other words, it's another way of reading this. If you look inside, you read it a little differently here. So Yavshu Raiv Olav, that the majority of leaves dried out, but you have 3 nodules that have 1 all in lachim that have fresh leaves, meaning they have 1 leaf. It's on each one that's fresh. It's kosher. It's kosher. And Rochus says as long as it's on top of the others, as long as it's a little higher than the others. Now, if the whole hadas was that way, it would be called the hadas shaita. It would be called the hadas that's invalid. But we're only talking about just these 3 because of the freshness. It's a problem. In other words, the rest of the hadas is everything is equal. Like Ezra just mentioned about is it on the same side, or is it coming out from the same nodule or not? But here we're talking about that you would have only 1 leaf that's fresh as long as it's higher than the others. So in other words, because in the bottom, the reason why this would be practical is because the bottom parts of the hadassim often have this, that they're not exactly even with each other. And so there, if you had at least 1 on top of the others that's fresh, according to the Rosh, that would be kosher. The simple understanding that the Shulchan Aruch says is that as long as it's on the top of each of the leaves, on the top of each of the stems, that's where you need to have it. But anyway, there's another interpretation by the Rosh that is brought in the Shulchan Aruch that that you have this three nodules with one that's fresh, or of course if all three are fresh, of course that's fine. And so that is basically what we've been learning over here about the hadassim, if they're dried out, and also if they've fallen off, if the leaves have fallen off. We saw that you could go by roiv. Okay, I guess we're going to stop here. Now, I should mention that next week is vacation, and we will start again on Monday, Bez Hashem, February 3rd. Is that February 3rd? Yeah, Monday, February 3rd. And if anyone is interested in having classes during the break, please let me know now. Is there anyone here that would be interested in having a class during the break? And maybe Isaac or see David would be interested. Anyone else that would like to join? Maybe even Jeffrey. Okay.
But do you want to? It would be good if we specified which days.
I think it would be just 10 o'clock every day.
Oh, I see. Because I'm sure we were all going to figure out which days we should go do something else in the morning. So. Okay.
Isaac, do you want to? Are you available to? Maybe you guys want to do some chazara. What would you like to? Maybe we should choose now. If you guys want to learn together, Isaac, are you available to? Or maybe Jeffrey, would you like to give the class?
When are we talking about?
Next week.
Next week, and Sunday the week after.
All
next
week next week.
All week next
Sunday.
week. Yeah, starting Sunday through Sunday the next week. So it's altogether 7 classes. If anyone would like to do it, I'll give you the password. You can set up the.
I don't remember the password from last time.
I don't know if it's the same. So David,
I don't
Jeffrey,
want to take a Fridays for the morning session because some mornings I have a great deal of difficulty making it.
All right. Let's see. Well, David, would you like to? You seem to be able to come every day. You want to? Can you set it up? Can I show you how to set it up? And then whoever joins, you could just read the Steinsaltz or whatever,
Well, I have the same limitations as Isaac. Sometimes I have a doctor's appointment, or I have to run to the bathroom or something for 10 minutes.
Right.
So maybe we really should take a break and then just review on our own.
All right. Maybe everyone should just learn at least on their own or call each other. Maybe you could have phone call chavrusas. So I'll give you all. You have everyone's email. It's on the thing. So if anyone wants to learn with someone with chavrusa, you could share.
Where is that? The list of everybody?
When I send an email, you see everyone's name. So maybe I'll. All right. So then you could, if you want to learn with someone.
Very good.
All right. Have a good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Rabbi.
Shabbos, everybody.
Oh, good Chodesh, right. A good Chodesh. And also, if any of you want me to put a prayer in, I'm gonna Mitzvah Hashem go to Eretz Yisrael on Wednesday. I'll get there on Thursday. So if any of you want me, I don't know exactly what day I'll go to the Kaisel, but send it to me soon so I could print it. If you have anything.
It doesn't have to be at the Kaisel. It's okay. In Eretz Yisrael, you're a step closer.
It's a direct phone call. Yeah. All right. Very good. Zygazon. Okay. Take care.
Thank you.